If you love classic cars, then Donald loves you. Hi, I'm Donald Osborne, and welcome to the Autorama Automobile Museum here in Newport, Rhode Island, and the opening of our new exhibition, The Street to the Strip, New England Hot Rods, 1945 to 1965. This is a really exciting exhibition that showcases what was happening here on the East Coast in the hot rodding scene after World War II. Everybody thinks of Southern California as the home of the hot rod, and in many ways it was. However, there was great action happening here in the Northeast, and some of the most imaginative hot rods and some of the most legendary hot rods were created here in Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and by people who really enjoyed their cars. We'll discuss a little bit with some of the owners of these cars and some of the lenders of these cars what makes these cars special and what sets them apart from their friends on the West Coast. So we'll be coming back during the run of this exhibition, as we normally do here on the YouTube channel, with specific videos on individual cars. We'll also be talking with lots of the owners of the cars to get the stories. We always say here at the Audrain that we love cars, but the real story is the story of the people of the cars. And in this exhibition, you'll get to know more about the people who created these cars, why and how. Let's go on our journey. And I thought we'd start by talking to David DiMuzio, the executive director here at the Audrain Automobile Museum, about how this show came into being. Now, David, I know that we had a conversation about a year and a half ago about what we might be able to do in this field, because we both were very excited about doing something that really showcases New England, because we're a New England institution.
Right. Yeah, we did a Customs and Hot Rod show a while back. It was just sort of generic, but I was thinking local history has to play a part of this. And it was really hard to find customs that survived from this period, post-war.
Because the original idea was that we wanted to do customs and hot rods.
That's right. So we really realized that there was lots of great material just with hot rods, and thinking about street racing and racing on the strip. And we were able to find 18 really good cars, all built within 75 miles of Newport. So here they are.
Now, one of the things, David, that you often talk about in your job here as the executive director and curator is the fact that you either have the struggle of finding material or the struggle of choosing material. And here, the riches were so abundant. It's amazing. We have a great consulting committee that worked with you and the curatorial team on this show, and they kept coming up with wonderful car after wonderful car.
We had a great, so Ben Chester and I engaged with Jeff Goldstein and Jerry Lettieri, Jerry was there, okay? Connecticut guy, he was there, he knows where the bodies are buried. And Jeff, an avid hot rodder and collector, they were tremendous help helping us find cars. And we ended up with too many. And we had that painful process of paring it down to what would help us with a story here in the gallery.
And one of the things also that I find so incredibly compelling is the fact not only have these cars survived and been treasured for years by family members, but also new owners who are very young that are really enthused about these period hot rods.
Yeah, and I was very, very pleasantly surprised, and we'll be interviewing some of those guys tonight. Guys in their 30s and early 40s who really, really still have the same passion for this material and are also building things that are really inspired by the 40s, 50s, and 60s, but also building things that are contemporary.
And we actually reflect a little bit of that in the show, because we have 17 period hot rods and one contemporary hot rod built very much in the period style.
Yes, and we'll talk about that.
That'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
All right, David, let's take a look at the show.
Great.
As we said before, we've had amazing lenders and a really great advisory committee that helped us put this show together. And one of the key members of that is Jeff Goldstein, and he is here in the gallery with me I know you're not supposed to have your favorites, because then all the other cars sort of get upset and they might growl at you or run you down when you're not expecting it. But this 1936 Ford Roadster is my favorite car in the exhibition, and what's great about it is the fact that Jeff has agreed to sell me this car, I think tomorrow, right?
Well, we haven't actually finalized the deal. Well, what's your terms?
Well, I'd pay you sort of half of what you're asking and do it over time. And so what do you need to close the deal?
Well, the month at Jay's house.
A month at Jay's house, done.
The trip to his garage.
Trip to his garage, done. You want to actually sleep in his garage when you go out to California?
Is there sleeping quarters? Because I would if
We'll
there
make
are.
them.
Then we got a deal.
Fantastic. Excellent.
We got a shake on it.
Thanks, Jay.
There you
So,
go.
seriously,
Okay.
I do love this car, Jeff. And as we've spoken about so often before, here at the Audrain, it's about the people and the connection in the cars. And I know that even though I love this car, it's unlikely that I'll end up as the owner of it because this car has been really special to you for a very long time. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I crossed paths with this car when I was 17 years old, and I was in college for my very first day of my very first class when the teacher stood up, like a lot of teachers do, and he said, everybody stand up, tell me a little about yourself, what you like to do, and everybody around the class did that. And then he stood up and he said, my name's Gil Stafford, and I like to collect antique cars. Well, as soon as he said collecting antique cars, whoop, my antenna went up. I said, I gotta meet this guy, I gotta talk to him. So I walked down in the front of the class and I said, Mr. Stafford, I'm Jeff Goldstein and I love antique cars. He said, would you like to come to my house and see my car collection? Well, today that would be a little weird if the teacher asked you that, but back then it was not out of line. And so on a Saturday, I went to his house. He lived in South Kingston on a dairy farm, a retired dairy farm. He had the big barn, and behind his house in the barn, the kind of car collector he was very unusual, but he kept every car that he ever bought from new. So the first car was a 32 Ford Roadster. He said, this is my honeymoon car. The next car is a 34 Ford Roadster, then a 36 Ford, 38 Ford, 46 Ford, because no cars during the war,
Right.
all the way up to a 55 Thunderbird. Now me at 17, I really couldn't relate to all those old cars. I loved old cars, but I knew nothing about them. But the 55 Thunderbird, that one I liked. So I said, Mr. Stafford, all these cars are really great, but I gotta tell you, I like that Thunderbird. So he said to me, Jeff, come over here, let me show you something. And he walks around the side of this car and he points at the engine. He says, do you know what that is? No, Mr. Stafford, it looked like a chrome shiny thing on top of the engine. That's a supercharger. And I put it on the car in 1937. It increases the horsepower from 85 to 125. He was very proud of that modification. And I'm looking at the supercharger, and you know, I'm from Rhode Island, and in Rhode Island, license plates are very important to everyone. We love our license plates. And I'm looking at the license plate. It wasn't this license plate. It was a very cool number, I thought. It was S100, and I liked the symmetry of the S and the 100. I said, Mr. Stafford, this is a really cool car. I like it a lot, but I gotta tell you, I really like your license plate, your S100. He says to me, Jeff, he's shaking his head, Jeff, that license plate, the governor gave me that license plate. I said, Mr. Stafford, if you ever want to get rid of the car, I'd like to have the license plate. He says, your name's Goldstein, you need a license plate with a G on it. Well, this was 40 years ago, and I forgot all of this history until I'm in Hershey, Pennsylvania. You know the big swap meet at
Absolutely.
Hershey. And I'm walking up and down the rows, and they have all the tents with cars for sale, and I see a 36 Ford, and I walk around it, and I notice it's got a supercharger in it. And so I think, oh, this is a really cool car, and I see the price is written on the windshield, and I talk to the owner for a few minutes, and then I keep going. And I walk down the hill, and I see a guy I know from Rhode Island, and he says to me, like all Rhode Island guys do, he says, I said, you see that 36 Ford up the hill there, Peter? What do you think of that? He says, do you know whose car that was? No idea. He says, that was Gil Stafford's car. Did you know Gil Stafford?
And how fast did you get back up the hill?
I said, you bet I did. He was my teacher. I scooted right up the hill. I took another look at the car. I walked all around it. And you know, I did like most people do. I kind of looked under the seat. I broke all the rules, by the way, of my car buying. I never drove the car. I didn't even hear it run. I was infatuated with it at that point. And I'm looking under the seat, and I reach into the glove compartment, and there's all kinds of stuff in there, like Band-Aids and paper clips. And in there is this keychain, and I pull out the keychain like this, and on the keychain is a DAV keychain tag. Do you know what that is? It's Disabled American Veterans. They gave you these little keychain tags with your license plate number, and on that license plate number,
S100.
S100. and it's on the column right now with the keychain on there.
Now, let
So
me ask
I
you a
had
question.
to buy the car.
This car appears to be largely original. What did you do to the car after you bought it?
Well, when the car came home, the guy that I bought the car from was very nice. He says, well, I'm from Connecticut. I'll deliver the car to you. It's not that far. So the day that he delivers the car, he backs right up to my garage, one of those enclosed trailers. He rolls the car in. I'm very excited that day because now I have this new car, you know. And I open the hood and I'm looking at the engine. And the first thing I notice is that there's a couple of wires down. This is my first early Ford. A couple of wires down below, and they look like they're just dangling. They just need to be pushed back together. You know, and on these cars, it's one wire, one connector, not like the modern cars with like 5 connectors. So I reach down and I pick it up and I go to put them together, and it was so brittle. It was like leaves, you know, like old fallen leaves from the ground. Just blah, 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 fell on the ground. So at that point, I knew I had to rewire the whole car, and that was the first thing that I did. And after I got it rewired, I attempted to start it for the first time. I didn't really realize how difficult it is if you don't know what you're doing with a flathead Ford to start it. It took a while to learn that. I figured out that the engine really didn't run very well. It had to be rebuilt. And so while the engine was out, we rebuilt the transmission. And the other thing is, because I'm so tall, I couldn't really fit in the car very comfortably. So I reupholstered the car too. But those are the main
Not that
things.
I sat in your car, but I did notice that there's a very long distance for me to reach the pedals.
There's a little bit of an
Not that I sat in your car, mind you.
No, of course, I'm sure that you didn't. I'm sure that you didn't.
Yeah.
No, we won't even go on to the gear shift knob.
No, exactly.
But what happened was I was at a car show, and there's a 36 Ford very similar to mine. And the guy that had that car is here tonight, Jerry Lettieri. And Jerry's car, I'm looking at it, and I put my hand over the seat like this, and right away, I can feel that the seat is much thinner than mine. I said, Jerry, this car is beautiful, and it's very similar to my car, but I really like your seat. He says, I hate that seat. He says, I'm sitting so far back like this, I can't even drive it. I said, would you like to trade interiors? He says, yeah, I've got a stock interior. My seat's like this big. So one day, him and his buddy Jimmy come to my place with the whole interior, and we swap interiors, and it worked out great.
See, now this is another great example of car collecting and the car collecting community in New England. In LA, there have been long negotiations about the price of the interior and what's the condition of your leather versus mine, and I'm not quite sure this is the right shade for me, and it wouldn't have happened that simply. So, the engine's been rebuilt, the transmission's been rebuilt, you've got the seat that fits you. What is this car like to drive?
Well, it drives like an old car, quite frankly. Like an old truck, I might say. The best attribute of the car is it's pretty peppy. I don't know if it's as a result of the supercharger. I've never driven another 36 Ford, but it's got some pep. And the exhaust system, it's a dual exhaust system, so it's got that sound. You know, there's something very unique about a flathead Ford engine. If you listen to it and you listen to an overhead valve engine, they have their own sound.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of nice about it too. And other than that, it's really like driving a very old car. You're very aware of everything. It has bias ply tires on it. It has 39 Ford hydraulic brakes, which Gil did. That was an upgrade because in 36 it would be rod brakes.
Hey, you know what Henry said? The safety of steel from pedal to wheel.
There you go. and I've driven cars with rod brakes since then, and if they're adjusted right, it's not a bad braking system.
They're actually probably better than some early hydraulic systems, but that's another story.
This one has an early hydraulic system, but the idea is plan your stops.
Right.
So you really have to think about everything. But other than that, it's really enjoyable. Oh, one of the other things that's really cool is this vent right on top. Have you ever experienced that cowl vent?
Yes.
It's kind of like you push it like this and the vent comes up and all of a sudden you don't need air conditioning. It's
the air in the world is right inside the car. So yeah, one of the things that we both agree on is the fact that these cars are so incredibly beautiful. The 36 Ford is so beautiful. In fact, I wonder, label aside, why people bought a Lincoln instead of buying one of these, especially the Roadster. It's got a really sexy look.
The Roadster itself, I mean, think about the middle of the Depression. Buying a Roadster would be the most impractical thing you could do. I mean, it has no roll-up windows, side curtains that you've got to snap on there, and you can really only hold 2 people, and if you want to bring anybody else, They're in the
On the
rumble
rumble
seat.
seat, exactly.
So this would be a complete. You really had to be a kind of bon vivant. Okay, is that the right word?
That is the right word, and Jeff, you are definitely the bon vivant for this car. Now,
Thank you.
I have to say too that what's really interesting about your collecting, and those people who have not seen the YouTube video of the visit to the Piston Palace will be amazed, because your energies and enthusiasms run far and wide in the automotive field. But we're going to take another look at an automobile that you loaned to this exhibition, which is very, very, very different than this beautiful and luxurious and comfortable Ford Roadster.
All right.
So now, miles away, but mere feet away in our gallery from the 36 Ford Roadster, is this amazing, basic, really fast dragster. Tell us about this, Jeff.
This is one of New England's earliest dragsters. It was built by Jack Hartney in the late 50s. And Jack was a hot rodder, and he wanted to go fast as he could in a straight line, a quarter of a mile. And this car is purpose built. That's all it has to do is go a quarter of a mile. So there's no radiator. Mm-hmm. There was no starter. It was push started. We've since added a starter, by the way, so we can kind of demonstrate it, because it's so much fun to start up. But anyhow, there's no radiator, no starter. There's obviously no creature comforts whatsoever. It's
not only no creature comforts, the relationship of the seat, steering wheel, pedals, differential are such that I think you'd have to be a very slightly built contortionist to get in, much less drive it.
You know, I've seen pictures of Jack Hartney, and he was about your size. Maybe you could try it on and see how you feel in there, you know, how you fit.
If I get into this car, I may never get out. But tell me, what kind of speeds did this car achieve?
Well, the top speed that I know of is 114 miles an hour, about 11.9 seconds in the quarter mile.
That is, as we were chatting before, 114 miles per hour today, think, oh my gosh, but 114 miles per hour in a vehicle that is basically engine, small gas tank, seat, steering wheel. That's it.
Yeah.
Although it's very intelligently built, as you can see, because the chassis tubes are nice and beefy, the triangulation, the welds are amazingly beautifully done. I mean, this is the thing actually meant, which is probably why it survived.
Jack was a brilliant engineer, but he built this in his garage, by the way. So he had to use some things that he had around, and bending tubes was very difficult. So these exhaust headers were bed frames. These were hospital bed frames that he was able, because he liked that bend. Mm-hmm. Now, one other thing that's interesting about the car, his son told me that the push bar on the back, it has an unusual bend too. It came from his tricycle.
Talking about a family affair. Now, what was it that attracted you to this dragster?
Well, that's a long story, Donald. But what happened was Jack's nephew owned the dragster and Jack's roadster. And I'm sure you're going to talk about the roadster. That was Jack's first car, and he offered both of them for sale at one time. And I went up and looked at them and was going to buy both of them. He said, these two cars have to stay together. And these were my uncle's cars. So some years went by, and that deal fell through. And Dave Samard said, you know, I'm going to buy the roadster, and the dragster's for sale, Jeff. You might want to go up and take a look at it. And at the first time when I looked at it, the dragster was like, I had no interest in the dragster. I wanted the roadster. But now I was building my museum and I was building my speed shop. And I thought, well, every speed shop needs a dragster. And what better dragster than this one with the history that it had? So I had to have the car. But when it actually came to fitting the dragster into my building, I ended up putting it on the wall. So the dragster is a piece of wall art. But I got to tell you, even though it's on the wall, if I bring it down, put oil in it, this dragster runs and runs very well.
Now let's talk a little bit about power plants, because obviously for hot rodders and races of all kinds, they wanted to go fast. And so did you find that in your experience in looking at New England hot rodders, that they worked primarily with a certain power plant, or were they just looking for the power plant that was right for their needs, i.e. Were there guys that always used old Chevys, Fords? What did they do?
I think there was an evolution in power plants. The flathead Ford was the universal, because there were so many speed equipment manufacturers, parts were available, flathead were all over the place and cheap. And I think when in Jack's case, he used a flathead Ford. This was already kind of old technology by the late 50s when he started building the dragster, but he was familiar with this car. He knew he could get all the parts he needed, and they were winning races. They were still very competitive. But by the early 50s, the overhead valve engine started to come into play. The Oldsmobile and Cadillac, that was the engine of choice if you had a few bucks. But if you were just the average guy, a flathead Ford was very accessible. I mean, really cheap. So this is what you would start with. And then in 1955, everything changed because Chevy came out with the small block Chevy, and once that engine came, flatheads were getting plucked all over the place, and the world evolved. And of course, the cubic inches came into play, and the hemispherical big Chrysler Hemis started to get used, and dragsters started going faster and faster. They lengthened the wheelbase.
Right.
They put parachutes in the back. They needed them, you know.
Yeah.
So this is a really an early pure example of what might have been when the whole dragster concept, when guys moved from hot rods into a purpose-built dragster, this is really the concept that they started with.
It's a great link between the later, faster cars and the roadable hot rods.
Yeah.
And so it's great to have this here also to see how the minds of the hot rodders work. And I think that's an important part of this exhibition, and we're so glad that you shared this with us, Jeff, and we can't wait to hear even more about your collection.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
But Donald, you don't want to buy this one? Because I got another offer.
Well, I think I'll stick with the 36. Thanks. In the pantheon of New England hot rod and customs builders, Frank Marotta was a legend. His family owned Connecticut Dragway, and we have here one of his most iconic creations, the Rake. And what's really interesting about this entire hot rod scene is the interest that young people have in this scene, because we are here with the owners of the Rake and the caretakers of it, Mr. and Mrs. Chimashak.
Thank you.
So, why are you people interested in hot rods from the 1950s and 40s?
Well, I've always been interested in classic cars, and hot rods are just such a unique American icon of history. Really, it's such an unusual, all-American practice to build a car in your garage and get it out and constantly improve it and see how fast you can go with it. And Kristen as well has always been a classic car enthusiast.
And now with this particular car, there's another connection, because I mentioned Connecticut Dragway, and you live nearby Connecticut Dragway, and it's become a point of fascination for the two of you. We talked about perhaps building a museum around it, so tell us about that, Chris.
Yes, that's always been a dream of ours, to open up our own museum and have the Connecticut Dragway be the main focus of it all. And we just love it. So overwhelmed with joy about being around the cars, and I actually am a pinstriper artist for a living, so it's just so wonderful to have it involved in all corners of our life.
Yeah, it really is.
It really is.
And we only live about 10 minutes from where the drag strip was. And when I learned that, I started collecting stickers and trophies and anything I could find that had to do with the drag strip. So for this to find us was just an awesome thing.
Tell me how that happened, because I think for a long time, a lot of people thought this car was lost.
It did. Some people knew where it was, but it was generally thought to be lost, or there was rumors that it had been street rotted beyond recognition, and one rumor said it was in California, which was totally false. And but the gentleman that owned it for about 40 years and had street rotted it a little bit in the 70s and drove it, and then parked it for about 35 years. That's how it gained this weathered appearance that it has. And trying to revive it, he brought it to a friend's house in Voluntown for him to fix it, and the project kind of fizzled out. And Kristen actually spotted it long before any of this happened.
2 years before we even knew that it was the Rake.
It was for sale by the side of the road for
It
like 1 day.
wasn't for sale. It was other cars in there.
Oh,
When I
yeah.
drove in, I was like, oh my God, oh my God. And it looked important, you know? I got the feeling from it, but I described it to Dean, and he was like, that should
can't
like a
be.
stock.
It sounded like a stock Model A, so I thought, that's nothing to worry. And then, it was 2 years later.
2 years.
And as I was telling you, we were at the Milltown Hot Rod Car Show in Sturbridge, Mass. And it was about 8:30 in the morning, and I was walking by and saw a board with 4 projects for sale, and one said Frank Marotta's drag car. And I had a picture of this car, and I thought, so I knew the Rake had existed, but I thought that can't be it. And I called him up and told him I knew we had a gold hot rod. Is this it? And he said, that's the car. And I said, well, if it is, hold on to it. I'm going to take it. And but we couldn't leave the show at that time, so we had to wait till the following day. It was driving me nuts to get out.
Did you sleep at all that night?
No. No, we were up early as possible and right out to it. And my dad and I actually went out together and saw it, and weren't even really convinced it was the Rake, but we knew it was obviously an old hot rod. So we bought it, and over the next 2 weeks, all the pieces fell into place and all the photographs, and it was what it is.
And what was the condition of it when you bought it, as opposed to the way we see it sitting now?
It looked a bit different. It had been painted actually a jade green metallic at one point, and just got very crusty. There was no engine. The front wheels are the original wheels that raced since about 1962, and it just looked like a neglected little coupe that needed love. So I decided to try to blend back and get it looking like something. Some of this is the original blue paint from 1962 or 3, and I decided to try to preserve as much as I could without going all out and restoring it.
Well, that's one of the conversations that we were having. That restoring any competition car, whether it's a Formula One car, a dragster, or a hot rod, these cars are living entities. So they were always modified and developed by their builders and owners, and so when you get one that's been parked for a while, you have to make a decision about where you go.
Yeah.
And so, how are you guys working through that decision process?
It's tricky. I pretty much just kind of slowly going at it, I guess. The most ambitious thing I've done recently is I acquired a 57 Chevy 283 block that I'm going to build exactly as Marotta did it, which was stroked and bored at 352 cubic inches, which was insane at the time. And but through all the magazines, I've pretty much acquired most of the specs for that engine, so that'll be the next big thing. So the engine will be put back exactly as it was. And the distributor that's in this right now is actually the correct one, so that'll stay.
And keeping in with how Marotta liked to be up with trends, we also kind of, since the patina look is in right now, we thought, for now, it's perfect because it's patina and it's, it's trendy. So.
And it also still tells the story of the car's life.
Exactly, yeah.
So now I will reveal to the world in this that I put a bug in your heads about the idea of keeping this car or any of your cars as found, so it tells the entire story of the car, but also building replicas exactly in the manner of for all of the stages of its life, which I think would be an amazing thing.
It would be.
That is the plan.
Now we're counting on the Shimsheks doing this. So watch this space. We'll be following up with them to make sure they actually get this done.
Indeed.
Now, let me ask you, what other hot rods do you have?
We've got the Bob Bishel Roadster. It's a 1931 Ford Roadster that he was actually president of the Nutmeg State Timing Association in 1958, the year that Marotta planned the drag strip, and they actually worked together. So that car and this one are kind of linked, and it's a pretty original car, but it wasn't quite together enough to entertain coming here. But and we've got a 57 Chevy drag car also called Mr. Freeze, raced out of Massachusetts, and a couple other Model A's seem to keep gravitating towards us. Yep. And Kristen has a couple of her own as well.
Yep, 54 Chevy Bel Air, which has been chopped and customized and is glorious, but needs a little bit of love right now because of all the other projects.
We drive our cars quite a bit.
We do. We drive them a lot, so they're going to break.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
That's what counts. Let me ask you this question too. A lot of people ask about, the hobby of cars, and is it safe going forward, because it's just a lot of old guys that are into it. And obviously we found, certainly through this exhibition and planning this and executing it, that there are lots of very enthusiastic, very knowledgeable, passionate young people like yourselves. Do you meet lots of other young people in this?
I do. It's definitely You have to go to the right places, I guess.
Uh-huh.
There's entire car shows just dedicated to traditional hot rodding, and there obviously you will see
encouraging.
younger people. And the Milltown show, for
Yeah,
example, is a
that's
good
an
one.
excellent show.
Yep, up in Sturbridge.
Actually, pinstripe on the spot all
Yeah,
weekend
yep.
there. It's my big
Yeah.
fun thing. That's the one where we found the Rake
Yeah.
a few years back.
Yep. But so I think there is definitely a younger following.
There is.
But it's
Comes
specific.
in waves.
Yeah, and certainly, events like this are only going to help that tremendously to get the history out there and known, and really inspire younger people to go out and find old hot rods like this and bring them back to life.
Well, it's excellent. Once again, we are honored that you have shared this wonderful piece of history with us. And we're also very excited about the fact, of course, that this exhibition will be on during the Audrain Newport Concours and Motor Week in October. And of course, we've got our 30 under 30 class, so there'll be lots of young people coming through and seeing these cars, and knowing that other young people have cars like this, I think will inspire them even more. Thanks so
Fantastic.
much.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
So Brian, I'm really excited that you brought Joe Corey's Sniper 1. It's probably, I think, one of two cars that actually lived here on the island their whole lives, so to speak. And we've talked about it a lot, but I hope you can just summarize a little bit about Joe and how you ended up getting the car.
Sure thing. Joe was my uncle before he was my uncle. I ended up marrying his niece later on in life, but he was buddies with my dad. So Uncle Joe was Uncle Joe when I was
Right.
younger. So my father, Joe, a bunch of the other guys, Victor Hugendorn, all raced back in the day. They hung out with Wesley Wicks, used cars sitting next to us. But those were the guys that hung out, and they went racing, and they went playing around on the street. And you know, Joe built this car early 60s, 63, 64-ish, raced it 64, 65.
Yeah.
But was just a cool car guy. Had a bunch of cars. Actually have 3 of Joe's cars in the garage now,
great.
but
One
we
of the-
saved them, kept them in the family.
Yeah. One of the interesting things you were telling me about this is he ordered a fiberglass kit from California for the body of this car. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And I assume, looking at the chassis, that's a lot of his own work too. So this was really built from scratch, is my impression.
Absolutely.
Tell us about it. Yeah.
It was all scratch built. Joe kept everything too. So there's catalogs for 3 or 4 different fiberglass bodies companies when he was searching for the right one. The receipt for the Magneto's there. The engine shop receipts are there. Sousa Chevrolet receipts are still there, but he kept everything.
Yeah.
But everything is built by Joe. It's all torch cut and stick welded. You know, it's Joe was a farmer by trade and built hot rods in his spare time.
Yeah.
But just a true car guy.
Yeah, it's so cool. And I know he caused trouble on the street, but did he race on the strip as well?
It raced at the strip primarily. These guys would go to Charlestown, Rhode Island. They went to Connecticut Dragway all the time, York, Pennsylvania. There's water decals from class winners winning the race. But I think the first year he went out, I think he won all but 2 of his races. I think there were 14, 15 races. There were a stack of trophies with the car. There's a class champion fender cover kicking around over here as well. But
So it's also one of the best preserved cars in the show. Not restored, very original. That's a really cool thing about it. And I sense you want to keep it that way.
it's not getting touched.
Yeah, it's a piece of history to
It's
you.
the way it was, and my job is just to kind of preserve it the way it was. But Joe wouldn't want to restore it. He raced it in the mid-'60s, early mid-'60s, and then parked it and went off to some other projects. It actually sat in a 3-sided barn with a half a piece of plastic on it and cats climbing all over it. But it's been like this from the 60s, and then Ray Helga, a family friend, bought it soon after Joe passed. When he got it back to his shop, he looked at it and said, I'm not going to restore it, and actually fired it up. It started like that. He's made passes down the strip of this the way it sits. He put a different set of wheels on it, rebuilt the mag, and went ripping down the track. It's just cool, and it's the way that Joe left it and the way that it's going to stay.
Yeah, awesome. I'm so glad it's here. I really appreciate your help.
Thank you for letting me tell the story of Joe.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, so we're talking about Wes's car. So you were saying, and the reason we put these cars together is that Joe Corey and Wes Wicks were good friends. And there are a lot of great stories about them being together. And you're just saying They were on a road trip, and what happened?
And so they were going down to Englishtown and then York, Pennsylvania. So when they were coming back, they said, all right, we're going to stay. My uncle lives out here. Wesley said, my uncle lives out here. We'll just crash at his house. We'll be fine. And the way that I remember the story is the two guys come pulling in with the race cars in the back of the station wagons, pull in, and the uncle goes, I don't want your riffraff here. I'm going to go find a place. So we brought him down to the local restaurant or the local bar, and they slept in the parking lot. So Wesley actually took his camera everywhere they went. So there's pictures of these guys sleeping in sleeping bags, in the back parking lot with the cars set up.
That's great.
But Joe and Wesley were good buddies. They palled around everywhere. There's pictures of Joe and Wesley sitting on the fender on this somewhere floating around.
I met Wes briefly up at Ray Helger's, and we hope that we're gonna talk to him in the next week or so. So that'll be great.
Super
and
nice guy.
I want to hear him tell the story as well.
He's got a super big heart, super nice guy. But he's a local historian, knows a lot of history about this car and a lot of these over here.
Great.
But just a great guy all the way around.
Awesome. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you.
One of the things that makes this show so special is the fact that everybody knows that every owner of these hot rods is at least 112 years old and really has no interest in anything else besides this. But I think that we've got a slight exception here. Maybe, David? What do you think?
Yeah, he's a young guy for sure. Yeah.
So, tell us about this amazing car that we're standing in front of, Ryan.
Well, we're standing here with Fred Steele's 1928 Model A sedan. He started building it in 1958, finished it in 61. He drove it cross country in 61 before putting the paint on it to have the interior done in Tijuana. He stopped at memorable places like San Francisco, Disneyland, Bonneville Salt Flats, and the first NHRA Nationals in Indy in 1961 as well.
And how did you come to have this car?
I own another one of Fred Steele's cars, a chopped 1950 Mercury, and because of that ownership, the person who owned this up until very recently called me and wanted it to go to a good home, someone who knew how to preserve it and keep its history alive.
And how did you get into period hot rods?
I started with my father. He brought me to a lot of hot rod shows when I was young. We started hanging around the tie rods.
When you were young, hold on a second, but when you were young, this car was still very, very, very old.
That's true.
So you went to car shows with a lot of old cars and their builders, and
Correct.
That's what really got you turned on.
Correct. I started going probably the mid to late 90s.
And your father was into hot rods to some degree.
Correct. He had some cars growing up. He took a break when my sister and I were born, and the family duties come along. But once I got old enough to enjoy the cars with him, we did it together, and we both joined the Tie Rods Club, and we've had a lot of fun doing that ever since.
Great to visit your shop. They have a really nice shop, lots going on, keep all their cars there, great place to work. Really
You
great
can also
environment.
answer a great mystery. I asked David earlier because I don't have the answer. Tie rods, Tyrods. Why?
From what I was told, they wanted to differentiate themselves from the car part, but they wanted to do some play on it. And apparently, when the first artwork for the Tie Rods Club plaque came out, when they were under a different name of the Piston Pushers, it looked as if they had broken tie rod ends and the wheels were kind of splayed out, so they started calling themselves the Tie Rods.
Fantastic, I love it. And how many active members of the Tie Rods are there today?
Right now, there's about 52.
52, okay. And how many of them are young guys like you?
Not many. I think the under 30 or under 40 crowd now is probably down to 3 people.
Okay, so in other words, we're doing this including you in this video here on the Audrain Museum Network, because we want to recruit new young members for the Tie Rod. So be sure to come out with your great old cars and an interest in great old cars. And what is it like driving this car?
Driving this car is interesting. You kind of need to have a stance. Being chopped with the visor on the front, seeing traffic lights is pretty hard. It's easier to stick your head out the window.
Why stop for lights?
They didn't back then, did they?
Exactly.
So it's fun to drive. The 3-speed is fun. It's got a Columbia 2-speed rear end, so you can get up to cruising speed on the highway. Being an early Ford with a small block Chevy, it's got a lot more power than you would expect out of it.
Now, one of the things, of course, that makes this show what it is, why we're here, is to celebrate the East Coast Hot Rod. And I lived in Southern California for a little over a decade, and everybody thinks Southern California is the be-all and end-all with hot rods, and it is, some great hot rods there. And there's sort of conventional wisdom about what differentiates an East Coast rod from a West Coast rod. This car sort of breaks those rules because it's chopped.
Correct.
And most East Coast cars weren't chopped. So is there something that you can say it's a hard and fast rule about East Coast guys did this, West Coast guys did that?
The biggest thing I think to differentiate the two would be channeling. East Coast cars were very deeply channeled, often unchopped, giving it a very low stance, whereas typically high boy style is what's more accepted in California.
And of course, I think that I always like to think, you mentioned the drivability aspects of having a chopped roof with a visor. I think that, and I get attacked for this all the time, but it's fine, there's nothing new, that California guys like to pose with their cars. East Coast guys like to drive their cars. So it's easier to see out of a car that hasn't got a chopped roof, so therefore you drive it more.
Yeah, that makes
fair?
sense. Yeah, that would make sense.
And so what is it specifically about the cars, the people, the stories that really connects you with this scene?
To me, it's the history, it's the stories, it's seeing all these cars that have survived all these years, and they were built by high schoolers and backwoods engineers, basically. They learned as much as they needed to, they made their own parts, and they made it work.
And these are always works in progress too, which is one of the challenges of presenting and preserving these cars.
Yeah, they all have a long history of alteration, tinkering, and I love that about these. They were trying new things. If they're racing them, they want to make them go faster. Obviously, they're tools of the trade, so to speak. So, lots of reasons to keep working on them.
And it's an interesting balance in this show of cars that clearly show that evolution and cars that are really quite close to the original builds. I mean, this car is amazing too, because looking at the paint and looking at the pinstriping, which is not done when the car was first built, but done later, but still done a long time ago,
Yeah.
and says so much about the character of the car and the character of the owners.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. Plus that interior is just
Yeah.
absolutely amazing.
Well,
a 1950s
it's fun to see.
actual Tijuana
Yeah.
tuck and roll interior.
A great original interior and a great original paint. It's also fun that we have Fred Steele's Roadster here, which I had seen in pictures but hadn't seen it in the flesh until just when it came in the other day. Now owned by Three Door Garage down in Boyertown, Pennsylvania. But what do you think about that? Have you seen it before?
When I dropped the sedan off this week, that was the first time I've seen that car in person, and it was pretty special, especially seeing the two of them together. Fred built them as two companions, and having them reunited is pretty awesome.
And that's something that David really tries to do here in the exhibitions at the Audrain. We've talked about this before, to have a show where people come in and see the things they know, that they've known, and see the things they've never seen before or only seen as a picture in a book. I think that this exhibition really has that element of comfort and familiarity and surprise that you really want.
Absolutely, it definitely does.
Well, thanks so much for sharing a bit of this wonderful history with us, and we'll learn a lot more about this car in a subsequent video. So I want to really thank you for bringing it.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks for your help, Ryan.
Thank you.
Helping us to put this exhibition together, and indeed integral in what this exhibition is, was our advisory committee. And one of the key members of that committee is my good friend Jerry Lettieri. Jerry, it is so wonderful to be here with you in the museum, and the show's on. Can you believe it?
The show is on, and the cars are wonderful.
Well,
And I remember a few of them back in the day, actually.
Well, that's the thing that we've been talking about a lot here, the fact that we try to put together shows that blend the familiar with the surprise.
Right.
And of course, for you, there's more familiar here than for most of our visitors.
Correct. Yep.
And so you have been involved in the hot rod scene in New England since you were a very young man. So what is it like now to see these cars today saved?
Well, it really looks good to see them saved, and unfortunately, most of them weren't. When these things were a few years old, they weren't worth too much, and as the kid got older, the father and the mother were stuck with the car in the garage. What did you do with it? You pushed it outside, and many of them did not survive. And some of these that are here did survive, and they've been restored, but they've been brought back to like the period. And it really looks good. I remember a couple of these in the Autoramas in the 50s. And as a teenager, I drooled over these cars.
We've got some photographs, some of the Autoramas around. Tell us what it was like to walk through the door of the Autorama and see these cars. What was the atmosphere like? Because it was also a competition, because they were giving out prizes, so
Yes,
people
they
wanted
were.
to really
Don't
impress.
forget, in the late 50s, you didn't have too many car events like you have now. You'd have an occasional old car, antique car event. Yet drag racing was pretty popular. You could go to drag races and see cars. But the Autorama in Hartford was the big show between Boston and New York. And it drew cars from Boston, New York, Pennsylvania, and quite an area. And this was something to see. It was in February. It was in the Connecticut State Armory. I lived only a few miles away. I went to the first one in 1951 with my father as a little kid, and I was going ever since.
And now,
not ever since anymore, but back then, yes.
I know that you're a fairly humble guy.
Yes.
As humble as you can be, Jerry,
Yes.
because you're such a great person. But you also exhibited and won prizes with your car.
I did in 1958. I had a 1933 Ford Phaeton in the Hartford Autorama, and I thought I was just something. Yeah, I did win a prize. I kept the car for a few years. I actually sold it in 1961 for $850. And I said, I fooled around with cars too much, spent too much money, attempted to build some drag race cars, and said, now I have to figure out how to make a living. And I became a teacher.
See, and of course your love of cars, this is one of the other things which I think really people need to know about hot rodders and people who are hot rod enthusiasts. It is about engineering, it's about driving, it's about speed. And your taste in cars ranges from Mercedes-Benz 300 SLs to Ferraris to hot rods. So it's everything.
Well, I sort of cover the gamut. I like hot rod. I like everything. I'm a deep-rooted car guy, 24/7, and have been ever since. My father was an antique car guy. Even as a little kid, I just grew up looking at cars, and I've never gotten away from them.
And one of the
I
things,
still have car magazines all over the counter where I eat my lunch and supper, and it's been great.
We never outgrow the things that brings us joy.
No.
Now, one of the things, because of that wide range of your interests, one of the things I think is really interesting that David and the curatorial team have done here is to put together this stock 32 Ford 5-window coupe and a hot rodded car. And you can see quite clearly and very visually what the changes are that transformed this stock car into this. And what was it about 32 Ford coupes, especially here in the East, the 5-window coupes, that really attracted hot rodders?
Fords in general were the car to make a hot rod out of. The first Ford V8 was 1932. 32, 33, 34, even into 36. They were good cars, and they made good hot rods. And it's funny, when we, as kids, I remember, we decided we want to build a hot rod. We would drive around and look for a car to buy. And it seems like the car you came across was the car you bought and made a hot rod out of. You didn't specifically look, you maybe wanted to find a 32 Ford. I ended up with a 33 Ford Phaeton, which is a 4-passenger convertible, and it was advertised in the Hartford paper. The price was right, $100. I bought it, brought it home, and with my father, we built it up and made a pretty neat hot rod out of it. And it was because that car was available. And then we'd go to the junkyard and find, well, gee, this bumper looks pretty good. How much is that? $8? Good, I'll take it. And you brought that home, and that's what the bumper. A lot of these things are just conglomerations of junkyard things we visualized and did.
But you said something interesting, visualized, put together with imagination. You know, not something that's bought off the shelf.
Some of them didn't come out looking that good either. If you take some of them, you know, maybe our vision was, we looked at a little bit of it at a time, And then we put it together. And then when it was all done, sometimes maybe it didn't look that good, but we just thought they were great and it was fun. And I loved it.
One of the things also that's sort of a conventional division between East Coast and West Coast cars is the fact that there are a lot more roadsters sold on the West Coast than the East Coast, obviously for the climate.
Because of the weather.
In this particular show, as it happens, we've got a lot of roadsters because they're great roadsters.
Yep.
And again, interest probably contributed to their being saved as opposed to some of the coupes. But coupes
Well,
are more
don't forget,
practical.
Ford made many, many cars.
Yes.
Ford was a big seller. So there were a lot of Fords around. I mean, Ford was making 1 million cars a year in the 30s.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the early 30s, times were a little tough, but they produced a lot of cars. And they ended up, you know, we're looking at a car that was 20 years old,
Sure.
20, 25 years old. It was a little obsolete as an everyday car, but it was inexpensive, so you bought it and made a hot rod out of it.
It's an astonishing thing to see what has happened with these cars and the fact that we had originally had the concept of this show being customs and hot rods, but
I know.
there just weren't enough East Coast
I remember
customs
you
that had
talking to
survived.
me about that, and along with Jeff, we started looking for customs, and we couldn't find any. They just did not survive. First, they were bigger, they took up more room. I don't know. And a custom is really almost a hot rod, because a lot of the customs had speed equipment. They were more of a full-bodied car.
Right.
And into a little newer, maybe cars from the 40s and the 50s, where a lot of hot rods were 20s and 30s.
Well, regardless of the fact that we couldn't follow that original vision, the vision that's been realized here in this exhibition, largely thanks to your work and Jeff's work and the Ben Cheston, the curatorial team, and David DiMuzio, is astonishing. This is one of the most amazing shows that we've ever had here, and we are so grateful for your help, Jerry, and we're looking forward to a great run through
I hope
November.
so, yeah. And I have some more stories, and maybe we have some events, and
We will indeed.
we will get together. Yep.
Thanks a lot,
Good.
Jerry.
Thanks, Donald. Yep.
We hope that you've enjoyed this brief look at our exhibition, The Street to the Strip, New England Hot Rods, 1945 to 1965. We'll be coming back to you here on the Audrain Museum Network with more detailed videos on some of the individual cars and engines here in the exhibition. And of course, we invite you to come to the gallery here in Newport at 222 Bellevue Avenue to see this exhibition, which will run through November 14th. Of course, this is the exhibition which will be on during our great Audrain Newport Concours and Motor Week, September 30th through October 3rd, and we welcome you all to come and visit the museum during that time as well. We're really excited about this exhibition, and we know you will be too. Thanks for watching.